Welcome to the Esports Insider Podcast in partnership with Mishcon Reya.
Welcome to the Esports Insider Podcast in partnership with Mishcon Reya. I'm your host, Ollie, and I'm joined by three wonderful guests this afternoon. Am I right, Mr. Sujoy Roy?
Hi, Ollie. Good to be here.
Yeah, so Sujoy is, of course, from Luckbox. We're also joined by Filip.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good to be here.
Filip joins us from Unibet, and, of course, last but very not least, Mr. Nocton from Mishcon Reya.
Hi, Ollie.
Very good to have you all on the panel, and you might have guessed here from the podcast guest that the topic of the day will be gambling. So we're going to discuss the sponsorship opportunity and the benefits that the industry can bring to esports, because as we know in the past there's been quite the tumultuous relationship between gambling and esports. So I guess from the operator side, from both Luckbox and Unibet, you guys are quite heavily involved in the scene. Luckbox being a dedicated platform, and Unibet recently getting involved in quite a big way with Astralis on a global level. So kind of why esports? Why gambling and esports, and why is it a good match for each other?
I can start there. I mean, me personally, I love esports, and that's why I'm so glad I can be able to perform my passion from an operator point of view as well. But I think operators have looked at esports for quite some time now. Going back a few years, we saw the whole skin gambling incidents, which might have been not too good for the industry. I think betting took a beating back then. But I think since then we moved into this period of more professionalism within esports, and not only the teams, but also the integrity and all those issues that brings with it. So I think for us, Unibet reaching a younger audience, a new audience that maybe we don't touch upon with our regular sportsbook offerings. I think that's the main reasons for us.
Well, it's different for me, of course, from Luckbox, because you don't ask me why esports. I am an esports person. You could ask me why did I come into gambling? It's like the opposite question. But in terms of why does Luckbox exist? There's an opportunity here to build a really good product for esports, because it's new territory, and I see lots of benefits for gambling and how it can affect esports and what it can do to the industry. And that's why I joined Luckbox. But obviously, I go back for 20 years in esports.
A true veteran.
From becoming a pro gamer so long ago to seeing where we are now, there's been a lot of progression, and I'm quite glad I'm still in the middle of it.
Yeah, and I mean, Nick, from your perspective, have you seen a change in perception from those incumbent in the gambling industry, or was it kind of alarm bells around the era of skin betting and when all that was going off?
There were certainly alarm bells around the era of skin betting, but that was mostly from, I think, publishers and others in the esports industry who saw it as a challenge, as a reputational issue for the growing industry. The gambling industry's been very interested in esports for a long time, but going back 2 or 3 years, certainly longer, there was a problem with being comfortable about risk management, pricing the events, and really understanding the industry, the events. Also being concerned about the integrity of them. But there were some companies that got in quite early, and most recently, as the esports industry has become more professionalised and more mature, as Filip has said, the larger names are getting comfortable with it, and they're also, I think they see it, they realise that fundamentally there's not a material difference between esports as an event, as a betting event, and traditional sports. Obviously there are significant differences in the way they're organised, but ultimately there isn't a significant difference, provided you have the market intelligence.
Yeah, I agree.
And Ollie, you said it was a fraught relationship, but the skin betting incidents. What that actually highlights is the fact that it needs to be done in the right way.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons we exist, and I'm sure it's one of the reasons why people like Unibet want to get involved, is because it's been done the wrong way for so long.
Exactly.
Yeah. That the esports fans don't have a baseline of what's betting, what should it look like.
Yeah.
They're not used to this world. We need to introduce them to it in the right way, rather than people ripping them off with unlicensed products,
Yeah.
or going through all the problems that they've had. There is a better way of doing it.
I totally agree with you, and I think esports betting can be done in a safe, fun, regulated environment, and that's the reasons we see more and more big operators coming into esports now.
Yeah, from like an opportunistic perspective, sort of when you tap into esports, it kind of represents very similar to a lot of traditional sports properties. I guess when you look at the Premier League, if you sponsor the Premier League team, you do get true global exposure. But say you guys have got in with Astralis, who are purely Counter-Strike, and I mean, with Luckbox partnering with Reya, he is well known across multiple esports titles, across multiple jurisdictions. Is there kind of extra value for people involved in the gambling industry by looking to esports? And how, like, in terms of your sponsorship activations, how do you see them developing, and are we going to see more companies in the space getting involved in that way?
I think so, and I think there's a lot of value this company can bring to the esports community in terms of content and new innovative ways of doing stuff. Like all the learnings we've gotten from regular sports, we can definitely bring into esports and help bring that stability and growth even further to the scene. So that's definitely something I think. Yeah.
And then for me, obviously, we are 100% esports anyway, so it's a different question. But I as an esports person coming into this, I appreciate that this is a revenue source for esports. This is a method to generate money, especially when everyone's watching it on free streams. There's every so often there's a pay-per-view, something like that, but generally people tune into Twitch and they watch it for free, right? There has to be somewhere where revenue is generated, and gambling is one of them. And if that money is plowed back into the industry, for me, that's a great thing. It means that teams can get sponsors, like Astralis can be supported to do what they do. For us, obviously we love having Reya on our team as brand ambassador, because he's generally the first person you see when you tune into a stream. It's like, oh look, there's our guy. He's the first face you see when the stream turns on. It's obviously great value for us, because we want to show people how betting can be done the right way, and we want to be out there. So it's very valuable for us to have someone like Reya on our team.
Nick, with that, with the challenges of these teams going across multiple jurisdictions and competing across the world, we've seen across traditional sports kind of challenges to gambling sponsorship and alcohol sponsorship, anything that's potentially considered a bit taboo. With these guys competing across the world, is there potential challenges that these guys are going to face with their sponsorships? Is there does the gambling industry have to be considerate of where they're targeting?
They most certainly do, but with the gambling industry in particular, those who have been operating for longer, like Unibet, but I know Sujoy is becoming used to this through Luckbox as well. Whilst the industry is completely global, the law generally and regulation as well is generally jurisdiction specific, and even within the European Union, there's no internal market for gambling. So absolutely, you have to be sensitive to the geographic restrictions about where you can accept bets from, but also, and I think this is the more interesting question for today's discussion, where will you run into and offend advertising regulations by carrying sponsorship logos or by sponsoring an event or having it on players' merchandise. Now, generally speaking, that's going to be less likely, but I mean, there's no doubt, and we've seen it in the poker industry in particular, that it certainly can be the case. It's a little like Formula One racing with their tobacco sponsorship. There will be events at which, irrespective of what the publisher thinks, the law of the local law requires you to blank out the gambling sponsorship. So it is certainly something that they need to be mindful of. It's something that changes regularly as countries regulate and change their laws, but the gambling industry is very, very good at that kind of thing. Very good at it. It's a highly regulated industry. A lot of these companies are carrying multiple licenses. They have very large compliance teams. They can deal with it, even though we would all prefer it to be rather more rationalised. It isn't, and it isn't likely to get any easier.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in like exploring exactly what you said. I mean, these guys have huge compliance teams, but at the same time, esports kind of poses a new challenge because also, say you guys obviously just Astralis, which are just Counter Strike, but say you're going for a Fnatic who are spread across so many different esports, some who don't take, like if you look at your Riot Games at the moment, they don't actually allow in their rule set of competition to have gambling sponsors on the show. You guys obviously you take wagers on those events anyway because there is an appetite to bet on them and there is no one stopping you from taking wagers there.
Yeah.
But do you see challenges from a gambling company side in compliance? Is that going to be an issue where gambling companies need to adjust and make sure? I mean, obviously Luckbox I assume was built that way up, but what are your views on that?
I think as you said, it's already happening and it will continue to happen. So I think I would invite the game publisher to have an open discussion about, gambling and IP. I definitely want to see that, and I think, as mentioned before, big trusted operators can come into the space and bring with them a lot of integrity that maybe the publishers don't have the knowledge about. So I think there's a mutual benefit to be had with an open discussion between operators and publishers.
And in terms of doing a sponsorship with a group like Fnatic with multiple teams and multiple titles, and obviously playing in multiple jurisdictions, that's not unlike how the remote gambling business deals with its affiliates. They could address that through having policies and parameters within which they effectively give guidance and essentially take responsibility, even though obviously there would probably need contractually to be some balance. And also, you do have to be, if you're in the team's shoes, you have to be mindful that your players are carrying logos. They may, if you're not careful, inadvertently break the law themselves. So there are lots of things to consider. The interesting point, which Filip's just alluded to, is can the gambling industry become accepted generally, even by those publishers who are resistant to it? And I think that's a really interesting question. I'm sure that it will become far more acceptable as it becomes embedded within the industry, as jurisdictions where some of those publishers are more either based or more exposed, for example the US, have regulated gambling markets. I think it will certainly become in due course the normality, the norm for these publishers. They won't want to miss out.
And if you look at what's happened in the past, you can see why, for example, why Valve are a bit hesitant about betting companies, because they've had the CSGO skin scandal. Yeah. And Riot don't want any of the shade from that. They've got a good business model going. But these industries are not built on gambling, whereas sports have seen gambling for such a long time. They understand how to do it and where it fits in. I think it's something that's going to evolve. It's going to evolve over time as the publishers come around to saying, okay, here's a good way that it can be introduced without it being a scandal for them. And I think they're just being very cautious, and I kind of don't blame them.
I don't blame them, absolutely.
Yeah.
But at the same time, unless they embrace it, you're going to get all the black market stuff, unlicensed people getting involved. It is important for them to say, it is something that's happening. They have to embrace it and find out how to put gambling alongside their leagues and make it work properly in a responsible way. And like you say, it's gone on so long in sports. There are safeguards against the problems and so on.
There are, and I think the publishers are the last people that actually need the money, probably. But as you correctly say, there are peripheral industries growing up around these game titles, and there is a significant risk that unlawful, unlicensed, unregulated gambling, even not nominally gambling. So, for example, the skins betting issues, that was not on its face gambling, but of course we know that it was as a matter of law gambling, and very dangerous and very harmful. So I think there is a serious risk. But of course, the really interesting point is they don't actually have to accept it. There may well be publishers that never accept it, and that's so in that way it's slightly different. So you look at, I suppose there is an analogy with the franchise sports model in the US, isn't there? The NFL, who are now embracing the possibility that regulated sports betting brings there, but not all of those. Not all of those sports are as quick to do so, and that'll be the case in esports as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on the US there, and that's a very, very interesting market, especially from kind of a gambling operator's perspective. I find it personally very kind of odd, the fact that Nevada is one of the leading regulatory bodies in the eyes of the iGaming and the gambling industry, yet the US was so slow with PASPA. Now PASPA repeal has come in, and there's so much opportunity there. Obviously, I think a lot of people sort of thought it was a gold rush, and you get in there really quickly and regulation would change, but everything takes time. Do you think? I mean, I'd say that some of the people in here, we've grown up with horse racing. You watch the Grand National every year. It's very much embedded in these industries. Greyhounds, darts. I mean, I absolutely love them, but they're kind of propped up almost by the gambling industry. Do you think we're going to see the widespread acceptance from people in the US, and therefore, what opportunity do you think that brings esports?
Well, I'm the last person to go on because I'm obviously not from a gambling background, but I don't think it should be. I see the synergies, but just from my experience, our board is full of people from PokerStars. They've got good experience in trying to move into the USA, and they're very, very cautious about what they say about it, which makes me think it's not. This is the reason why it's not suddenly exploded into the USA. There's a lot of hurdles left.
There certainly are, and whilst this podcast may be listened to on later dates, obviously, that on the day we're recording this, it was only 24 hours ago that the Department of Justice in the US reversed an opinion they gave, and have suggested that what's a piece of federal legislation may in fact stand in the way of a regulated gaming market in the US. After all, effectively they reversed a decision that they published about 5 years ago, which paved the way for regulated online gaming. As it happens, it shouldn't make a difference to sports betting and betting potentially on esports, because that was, for reasons I don't need to go into, but it highlights why the US is a tricky market. It's taken a long time to get here. It's a very fragmented market. There's 51 states, whatever it is. There's federal law. There's a puritanical zeal about a lot of those jurisdictions, and therefore within Congress and Senate, it's difficult to get this kind of legislation through. There are very strong interest groups from the non-remote casino market, from Vegas. It's no wonder it's taken 25 years. All my career, people have been saying, it's just about to happen. Yeah. I was astonished when it did, but I think it's sensible, because they also had the largest unregulated betting market, as far as I'm aware. I mean, we don't really know what the position was in China, but for the last decade, 22 decades, the sports betting market in the US has been massive, almost all untaxed and unregulated. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It just was crazy. So it makes absolute sense that they're doing it, and in due course, those industries that provide events on which that regulated market wishes to bet can decide to embrace it to different degrees, and I'm sure that they will, to a large extent. But as I say before, it's entirely possible that some of the titles will, because possibly they don't see it as conducive to their demographic. They're concerned about the reputational issues, not so much integrity, but gambling per se, largely because of the demographic, I think. But broadly, I think they'll see it as an opportunity.
Yeah, I think I read that the New Jersey betting handle since June was $1.14 billion or something, so it's a huge amount of money and a huge opportunity over there. And I mean, in terms of a sponsorship perspective, and Unibet and Astralis, when you went into your Astralis sponsorship, obviously, very, very big deal. What are the aims for Unibet's partnership, and is the US part of it? Obviously, Astralis, the biggest Counter-Strike team last year, unbelievable results, but they're winning tournaments in the US, they're winning tournaments in Asia, they're winning tournaments everywhere. What are you guys looking to get out of it?
I think when we sat down and discussed where we're going to find a team to sponsor, I think the first thing we looked at was the organization behind them and the professionalism of that organization. Obviously, Astralis being owned by Refresh, who's been in the industry for quite some time, doing Blast Pro as well. very knowledgeable, very professional. So basically, we share the same values with Astralis when it comes to professionalism and vision and strategy and so forth. And then in terms of the global aspect, as you mentioned, I think yes, they're winning tournaments in the US, but the viewers may not be all from US. I think that's an important factor to keep in mind, that there's distinction between the physical viewers and the viewers on Twitch, the stream. So for us, we see a lot of European viewers, for instance, which for us is the main markets we operate in.
Yeah, cool. And just a question to everyone. I mean, how do you see, in a lot of industries, gambling becomes almost part and parcel of an entertainment product, and it really it's there to enhance the viewer experience. How do you see that working with the esports industry and different titles? Do you see it as something that's really going to become embedded as part of things in the future?
Yeah, for me, because I'm a huge esports fan, I know there's other people in here who are as well, but I used to bet on Dota Lounge. I used to bet good cosmetics, and it's fun. It is genuinely, it's nice to invest, to be invested to the result of a game. And sometimes maybe you're not a fan of this team or that team, but after you've got a bet on the game, it changes the dynamic of how
absolutely.
you watch that.
Yeah.
And it suddenly becomes very dramatic, and then it's so much fun watching it. You're cheering, you've got emotions going up and down. It actually enhances the experience for me. And that's the experience we want to give to our customers as well. It's like really being part of this and living the games as they're going on. It does amazing things to the viewing experience for sure.
100% agree with you. I think speaking as an esports fan and esports punter, I agree with you. It elevates the game you're watching to another level and brings that more fun aspect into it.
But this is one of the problems with esports, is that the teams are very international, and if you're a newcomer to esports, it's like, well, do I support this team? Do I support this team? Well, Astralis are number one, for example, so maybe they're getting fans. But why would you then support Astralis over Fnatic if you weren't Danish, for example?
If you're Swedish, for example.
So you sometimes need a buy-in, a little bit of an edge to say, these are my guys, and when I'm watching this game, I'm cheering for Team 1 versus Team 2.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you can't compare it to football, for instance. You cheer for your hometown team. It's not the same in esports. So you need that edge.
I'd like to argue that one. I think there's plenty of Manchester United fans in London. But no, I mean, yeah, definitely, I kind of agree. There's a lot less team loyalty than there is player loyalty. Does that pose a risk? Does that pose a risk to operators? You go and sponsor a big team, and then next year the meta changes in Dota 2, the meta changes in League of Legends, and suddenly your team is actually terrible from a sponsorship perspective. Do you think that's going to sting operators? Do you think that will put them off? Or is the prospect of gambling and how big the handle can be enough to keep people coming back?
I mean, it's always going to be a risk. No one can say 100% that won't happen. But at the same time, I think esports have reached a level of, stability now. We don't see players jumping around to different teams because of salaries. We see stability in the esports scene, and I think coming in as a sponsor as well, you bring some cash flow to the team, securing that team for the next few years.
And it hasn't been as bad as you make out, actually. I mean, I think you see the same in sports. Teams go up and down all the time. Players are transferred. But organisations that are good tend to keep attracting good players, and they've got a good infrastructure to make the team work, even if players change. It has developed a long way. We're already getting to that stage where it's pretty stable. And I mean, this is why you might come in and sponsor a team, because you have confidence that it's going to work out in the long term.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it.
Yeah, and now I'm going to kind of round off this cracking episode of the podcast with, I want you to make your outlandish prediction related to gambling and esports. So let's look 5 years down the line, which in esports is probably about 100 in kind of real terms. But what do you see happening? What's your outlandish prediction? 5 years time, Sujoy, let's go.
Why are you looking at me first?
You're starting. You're kicking this off. Let's go.
That's a tricky one. I mean, if you want something outlandish, it is literally Riot and Blizzard embracing the gambling as part of the leagues that they build. I mean, it's hard for me to say. I'm new to gambling. Go on, let someone else go first.
Yeah, I can go. I think the trend we see now, especially on the gambling side, we see a lot of gamification. Going towards that. I think in a 5 years' time, we're going to see less of that and coming back to the more simplicity of it, because you want to enjoy the purity of the game. You still want to place a bet, but I think we're going to see the games being so immersive that you don't want to take away that gamification aspect of that. That's what I think.
That's interesting. I'm sure that's right. The gambling sector's been desperately innovating to try to become in itself more immersive and entertaining, whereas the opportunity that esports offers is that the underlying product itself is pure entertainment.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah.
I think you must be right.
So me as a punter,
I can't bet it.
For me as a punter, I want to keep it as simple as possible. I still want fun and entertainment and some informative statistics so I can lay my bet. But apart from that, I want to keep a clean site and the UX to be smooth and working.
Yeah, I mean, I think last year I saw the first completely wacky product, which was someone that, as a PUBG game happened, he'd built a slot machine that actually took real time what was happening in a PUBG game and applied it to kind of a bingo mechanic. And I thought, whoa, we're jumping 100 light years ahead here. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. You might as well go into PUBG and play it.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of agree with you. I want to see it as a nice clean slate, and I think that's where we'll go. I think your prediction that Blizzard are right, I think that's probably the most outlandish you can actually get. And,
I'm looking more like a few months ahead to when we launch. I'm not looking 5 years right now. I've got too much on my mind, sorry.
But I think that might happen too. I would like to see that happen at least, so we can work together as partners with us.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'd like to thank you, each and every one of you, for joining me on today's podcast, the inaugural ESI podcast. I've had 3 wonderful guests discussing the gambling issue, and I hope you all found it very entertaining to all of our listeners, and we will be back very shortly with some more cracking content. Thank you very much also to our partners, Mishcon and Reya, who have been very supportive of this ESI podcast.